When it comes to Hollywood today, the landscape has seen a seismic size change over the last 15 years or so. Of course, Marvel used to be a name that was pretty much synonymous with mediocre and middle of the line. Now, they happen to be the biggest name in Hollywood with the biggest franchise, which have led many to try to compete with them by mimicking their success. But when I look back at the last 12 plus years of Marvel Studios and what they've been able to do, one thing many people always wonder, including myself, is the question, did Marvel Studios set unrealistic expectations from every big blockbuster today or not? Now, I think many of you will come into this expecting me to say no, but it's not really going to go that way, and we'll talk about that after the intro. At this point, we have hit that time where box office seems to be making as much headlines as a brand new film that is opening on a weekend. It just kind of goes hand in hand now, and people automatically want to know about the box office numbers. Sometimes people are more hyped for the box office numbers than actually hearing anything else about the movie. Now, when it comes to the box office totals of films, we know that in the top 25 films of all time, Marvel Studios holds 9 of these. That is quite a lot, and they've been able to come up with this in only 11 years, which makes it an even crazier little stat for you guys. Now, on the screen, I will toss up, like the top box office earners of all time, and as you guys can see here, there's quite a lot of films, obviously, that have high box office numbers, but Marvel does seem to have plenty of them. And something I've seen most recently would, of course, Birds of Prey, but I've seen it brought up plenty of times is, did Marvel Studios set unrealistic expectations for many films coming out these days? And that's the fact that apparently, unless your film hits a $600 million or higher, it's considered a flop. Now, of course, this would make multiple MCU films as well flops. The likes of the first Ant-Man. Hell, most of Phase 1 technically would be considered a flop, from The Incredible Hulk to Thor to Captain America. Again, it's all about the perception, right? But when you think about it, is this something that is Marvel Studios really, and are they at fault, or is it just a generalized, Marvel comic book movie, right? Because that's how people sometimes clump it all together. I think what really stands out to me with this, though, is if you look at it, Marvel Studios certainly has kind of broken the mold, right? I mean, yes, there's plenty of Star Wars films in there as well, but again, it's on Marvel because they're so constant. It seems like that every other film you hear good things about it. And then the moment something comes out, and let's say it's not doing as good as expected, automatically people say, well, it's a box office failure. Even if the film makes a profit, people are like, well, it didn't hit $1 billion, so it's a failure, right? Like, this was happening with The Rise of Skywalker, when people were like, well, it's not going to hit $1 billion. They're like, well, if it doesn't hit $1 billion, it's a failure. Why? Because this movie hit $1 billion. And this constantly goes back to Marvel Studios. Again, there was some of that perception with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, because people were looking at that one saying, well, that's going to hit $1 billion, and then it didn't, and people are like, well, it's not a failure, but okay, so why is it some movies are considered failures, some aren't? And I think, again, this goes back to that perception of what exactly were you targeting. Like, for example, Batman v Superman, that's the greatest example. They were hoping for $1.6 billion. That's what Warner Brothers was telling investors and people, because, well, if the Avengers, a bunch of nobodies, can make 1.5, Batman v Superman has no problem hitting 1.6, right? Because, again, Superman, well-known, Batman, well-known, you're tossing Wonder Woman in there, you're tossing a bunch of other characters, but then at the end of the day, Aquaman, in his standalone film, made more. Same with the Justice League, right? So it's an interesting thing to look at, and I don't think Marvel Studios set unrealistic expectations. I think people personally set unrealistic expectations, as well as studios, and you hear about this. Because, again, let's say if they were making a new Daredevil movie, and it's $50 million to make that movie. Okay, so the expectation for that is what? $1 billion, or it's a failure? No, that movie would have to make $200 million, and it's an automatic win with, tremendous amounts of profit. Again, this is like the Joker thing, right? That film had a cheap budget of $55 million, and look at the profits it made. So again, you kind of have to look at everything at a more baseline level of kind of taking a step back and looking at it with the eyes of, well, where exactly does this land? Because nobody expects a film that costs 50 million to do $1 billion. But if you spend 500, 600 million with marketing, putting out a movie that should make $1 billion to break even, and it doesn't, again, we're talking the likes of Justice League, then yeah, there is an unrealistic expectation for some other films when they're all comparable and all under the same sort of, banner, and having people just look at it as a broad spectrum. And for example, I love the horror genre. A horror movie makes 120 million. Everybody's saying it's one of the biggest horror movies of all time, and this is starting a franchise. But you look at the production budget of these, 15, 20 million tops? So again, you have to think about it at a more reasonable level.